Mike Gundy is suggesting, I see, that Oklahoma State and Oklahoma do spring practices together. So this comes off the heels of the Deion Sanders comments from a couple weeks ago, and this has become a big topic in college football, changing spring practice and spring football games. So there's Mike Gundy talking to the media. I did not listen to this, but let's read it together. Understanding that Oklahoma State, which is called Bedlam, has been discontinued with Oklahoma's move to the SEC, and I don't want to say their refusal because I don't know what the contract situation is between the two schools and who is desiring to keep the series alive. But I do believe, based on what I've heard, that it's Oklahoma State that wants to keep the Oklahoma series alive, but Oklahoma moving to the SEC and then figuring that they would have to play, if they do play, in fact, Oklahoma State every year like they have been forever, then that would really make it difficult to schedule another difficult non-conference game. So I believe Oklahoma is on the side of distancing itself from Oklahoma State, while Oklahoma State would benefit more greatly from keeping this series alive. So Bedlam is back, maybe in the spring. That's what Mike Gundy wants. Longtime Oklahoma State coach said Tuesday that he would prefer having two practices against rival Oklahoma in April instead of holding an intra-squad spring game. So he doesn't want, instead of holding the intra-squad spring game to play Oklahoma. Cowboys and Sooners discontinued their Bedlam series last year after Oklahoma left the Big 12 for the SEC. Until then, the two in-state rivals had faced one another for 112 straight years. This is what college football expansion and realignment is doing to the fabric of the game. 112 straight years these two played until last season. Gundy suggested that the Cowboys could go to Norman on April 12th, the same date that Oklahoma has its scheduled Crimson Combine to replace the Sooners' traditional spring game. The following weekend, Oklahoma could make the trip to Stillwater in place of Oklahoma State's spring game. So Mike Gundy's saying, let's do this year. Let's not even hesitate. Let's not even plan for the future. We can do it this year. Gundy added he would also be open to just one annual spring meeting with the Sooners, with the two programs splitting the ticket gate and putting the proceeds toward NIL. It's not going to be a live game, but nobody really has live scrimmages anymore, Gundy said. So you make it a full thud like we're doing and practice against them just like they do in the NFL. Gundy noted his idea stemmed from Colorado coach Deion Sanders. Okay, under current NCAA bylaws, football teams cannot play against each other in the spring. Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas, Ohio State, and USC are among the programs opting to cancel their spring games, also include Florida State. Texas coach Steve Sarkisian said last month that the expanded schedule with the 12-team playoff prompted him to think differently about the spring game and increased wear and tear on his players. I don't get that point. With the way spring games are being played now, and they should be hitting a little bit in spring practice, I would hope. I know that they're hitting to a certain extent. So what we're seeing in these spring games is not any additional wear and tear on the players. Come on. Gundy said Sanders got him thinking in recent days of how Oklahoma State could better utilize its spring. I think it's a great idea. We get tired of practicing against each other. So it's good for the football teams too. Jackson Johnson also already on the jump with his bowl projections this year. Oklahoma State in the Liberty Bowl. Todd says you can still have out-of-conference rivals, but I think this is the deal. So consider, yes, there are plenty of non-conference rivals that are still played. The ones that come to mind are the ACC and the SEC games between Kentucky and Louisville, and Georgia Tech, Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina. Yes, they do exist. It is a bit of a Uh, it's a bit of a deterrent, though, against scheduling other difficult non-conference games. So if you're Oklahoma and you're going to play Oklahoma State every year, then what incentive do you have to play another big non-conference game? And if you never play another big non-conference game, you never play anybody else besides Oklahoma State. Like what happens with Iowa. Iowa played Pitt home and home about 6 or 7 years ago or more. Otherwise, Oklahoma or Iowa does not play anybody outside the conference. You can. Georgia did last year. They played Clemson and Georgia Tech, and Clemson played South Carolina and Georgia, and Louisville played Notre Dame and Kentucky. So teams do it, but there's just not much incentive to do it and make it more difficult on your team if you're going to play that out of conference rivalry game. So Jackson says, I'm cool with Mike Gundy, but his position on the Bedlam rivalry where he doesn't want Oklahoma State playing OU in the season, but in the spring is making me like him less. So did he state that he doesn't want to play Oklahoma during the season? Exactly. Good point here, and certainly an obvious point by Cheviota. I don't know what's going on with car brands there, but Cheviota says there's more room for SEC teams to do that, basically, because they only play 8 conference games. And even if you schedule 2 difficult non-conference games, then you still have 2 cream puffs to play, as opposed to being in the Big 10 or the Big 12. And if you schedule 2 difficult non-conference games, then you only have 1 cream puff. Rivals scrimmaging. Yeah, I'm not crazy about it. I would rather see them actually play a football game, but maybe on the years that they don't play doing this. So if, let's say we do in college football go to this format where teams are playing scrimmages instead of intra-squad spring practice games, spring games, they're playing other teams. And Deion's proposal, which again has been proposed by plenty of people in the past, so it's not his original idea, but he's the one proposing it now. Let's say that takes hold. I would say that Oklahoma State, if they cannot agree on playing every year, that they hopefully can continue their series going forward. We'll have to see if they've got any scheduled games on the books. But on the years in which they do not play, they could do this instead. They could play in the spring. That could be their spring matchup. And I would sign a contract that would basically say, we're going to play this many times in the next 20 years in regulation games during the fall. But when we do not play in the fall, we're going to play spring football games. So people get a taste of Bedlam every year.